The day my father was buried, my brother called me into the sitting room where the family had gathered and handed me an envelope. Inside was a cheque, 50,000 rupees. He said, "This is your share. Papa always wanted you to be independent. Now go build your own life." I had worked in Papa's business for 4 years. I had managed the accounts. I had sat across from suppliers and negotiated terms my brother didn't understand. I had been there every day because I believed that work meant something, that presence meant something, that being my father's daughter in that business meant something. 50,000 rupees. I took the envelope. I didn't say anything. I left. What my brother did not know, what none of us knew, was that 3 years before he died, Papa had walked into a CA's office with a specific document in mind. He had registered something carefully, quietly, and entirely without telling anyone in the family. 7 years later, that CA retired. And before he did, he sent a letter. This is what was in it. And this is what happened the day my brother finally understood what Papa had actually decided. My name is Priya, and I am the second child and only daughter of a man named Ramesh Kapoor, who ran a textile trading business in Agra for 31 years. Papa had built the business from very little. He had started in his mid-20s with a small shop in the old market, a modest inventory, and the kind of stubborn patience that characterizes people who grow things slowly and keep them growing. By the time I was old enough to understand what the business was, it had become a stable and well-regarded operation. Not enormous, not the kind of thing that makes headlines, but the kind that supplies consistently and delivers reliably and has the same clients coming back year after year because they know what they are getting. My brother Sanjay was 5 years older than me. He had joined the business at 23. After a degree he completed with moderate enthusiasm and a job he left after 8 months because, in his words, "Working for someone else doesn't suit me." Papa had welcomed him in without conditions. Sanjay had a personality that rooms organized themselves around. Confident, expressive, comfortable in the social spaces where deals get talked about informally before they get formalized. He was good at the relationship side of the business. He was less good at the operational side, and he knew it and compensated for it by being present and vocal in the parts he understood while quietly leaving the parts he didn't to whoever would pick them up. I joined the business at 22, after my own degree, because Papa asked me directly and because I wanted to. I am being accurate when I say I found it genuinely interesting. The way an operation that looks simple from the outside reveals its complexity the moment you're inside it. Supplier timelines, payment cycles, inventory logic, the particular arithmetic of margins that shift with season and demand. I learned it quickly. Partly because Papa taught me well, and partly because I am the kind of person who learns best by being given real work and real responsibility rather than being given a managed version of either. For 4 years, Sanjay handled the clients and the conversations and the relationships, and I handled the numbers and the operations and the things that kept the business functioning when the conversations were over. It was not an arrangement anyone had formally proposed. It was the arrangement that emerged naturally from our different dispositions. And for 4 years it worked because Papa was there to hold the center of it, to be the person both of us reported to, the person whose judgment neither of us questioned, the person whose presence made the unspoken arrangement feel stable. Papa died on a Tuesday in October, 7 years ago. A cardiac event, sudden and without warning of the kind that would have allowed any preparation. He was 63. He was in the office when it happened. By the time the ambulance arrived, there was nothing to be done. The days that followed were the kind that compress and expand simultaneously. Certain hours stretched to an impossible length, and others collapsed into nothing, the whole week arriving eventually as a blurred and exhausting composite that I could not have reconstructed in order even a month later. What I remember with complete clarity is the sitting room, 3 days after the funeral. The family gathered. My brother standing by the window with the particular posture of someone who has decided something and is about to announce it. The envelope he handed me, the cheque inside it, 50,000 rupees. "Papa always wanted you to be independent," Sanjay said. "He told me several times that he didn't want you to feel trapped in the business. This is your share. Now you can go do what you want with your life." I looked at the cheque for a moment. Then I looked at my brother. His expression was composed, the practiced steadiness of someone who has rehearsed a difficult conversation and is delivering the rehearsed version. I thought about the 4 years I had spent inside that business. The supplier negotiations where I had saved margins my brother didn't know were at risk. The accounts receivable I had restructured in the second year that had brought in 12 lakhs, the business hadn't been able to collect for 18 months. The operational systems I had built that were still, at that moment, running the back end of everything Sanjay was about to inherit entirely. I took the envelope. I didn't say anything. I left the room. I want to tell you why I didn't fight. It was not because I didn't know I was being wronged. I knew. It was not because I was afraid of confrontation. I had negotiated with suppliers 3 times my age without any particular anxiety. It was because I had watched what fighting for your position inside a family that has already made a decision about your position actually looks like. And I had decided, standing in that sitting room with a 50,000 rupee cheque in my hand, that I would not spend the next years of my life doing it. I would leave. I would build something else. I would not give the situation the power to define the rest of my life by spending the rest of my life arguing about it. So I left. I moved to Pune. I took a job at a mid-sized manufacturing firm in their accounts department. A significant step down from what I had been doing, but a start. And a start in a city where I had no history and no complicated associations and could simply begin. Over the next 2 years, I moved upwards steadily, earning roles with more responsibility, learning the corporate operations environment that was different from my father's business, but built on the same underlying logic. By the 4th year, I was managing the finance operations of a company with 140 employees. By the 6th year, I had been approached by a larger firm and had made the move. I did not go back to Agra often. The house where I had grown up was now Sanjay's house, in the practical sense. He lived there with his wife and their children. I visited twice a year, stayed in a rented room nearby, saw my mother in neutral spaces. The business, which I no longer thought of as having any connection to me, had apparently continued under Sanjay's management, grown in some areas, contracted in others. The operational systems I had built carrying it through years when, from what I heard indirectly, the relational side was doing better than the operational side deserved. I had not spoken to Sanjay, other than in the minimal necessary way at family occasions, since the day he handed me that envelope. There was nothing to say. We both understood the transaction that had occurred. He had decided what I was worth, and I had decided not to accept that as a permanent fact about myself. We simply inhabited different versions of the same family from that point on. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in March, 7 years after Papa died. It was addressed to me at my Pune address, which was itself surprising because the only people who had that address were my mother, 2 friends from college, and my employer. I didn't recognize the sender's name. Mahesh Gupta, Chartered Accountant, Agra. I opened it that evening. The letter was from a CA who had worked quietly and independently for 35 years and was now retiring. He wrote that he had been the accountant for a private trust that had been registered by my father approximately 3 years before his death. He wrote that this trust had been created with specific and unambiguous instructions regarding its purpose and its beneficiary. He wrote that he had maintained the trust's documentation in his records throughout the intervening years, as his professional obligations required, and that upon his retirement he was taking steps to ensure the trust was formally wound up or transferred to active management, as the beneficiary directed. He wrote that the beneficiary named in the trust was me. He wrote that the trust held assets, a portion of the business's original equity that Papa had registered in the trust's name before his death, along with a fixed deposit that had been compounding for 7 years, and that the total value, as of the letter's date, was slightly over 62 lakh rupees. He wrote that he was sorry it had taken this long. He had assumed, in the years after Papa's death, that the family was aware of the trust and that it would be activated in due course. It was only when he began the process of formally closing his practice that he had looked at the outstanding trust files and realized, with some concern, that this one had never been activated and that the beneficiary had perhaps never been informed. He said he hoped the letter reached me well and that he was available to speak at my convenience. I read the letter twice. Then I set it on the table and sat without moving for a long time. If Priya's story is pulling at something inside you right now, if you have ever worked hard for people who decided, quietly, that your contribution didn't count, please like this video. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment below. Tell me about a time when someone underestimated what you were worth. I read every single comment. Now let me tell you what happened when Sanjay found out. Papa had done this 3 years before he died, which meant he had done it while I was still working in the business, still coming in every morning, still believing, as I believed then, that the future of that business was also mine in some form. He had watched. He had understood something about his 2 children that he had never said directly, about the difference between the one who spoke easily and the one who worked quietly, about how easily the second kind of person gets outmaneuvered by the first kind when there is no longer anyone in the room who sees both clearly. And he had done something about it. Not by confronting Sanjay, not by making it a family argument or a declared position, but by building a quiet, legally registered, financially real structure that would still be standing long after he was gone. He had told no one. He had trusted the process, the documents, and the CA he had worked with for 15 years to hold it correctly. And he had trusted, I think, that it would eventually reach me. I called the CA the following morning. Mahesh Gupta was a soft-spoken man in his late 60s who explained the structure of the trust with the patient thoroughness of someone who had spent a career making complicated things clear to people who needed to understand them. He confirmed everything the letter had said. He explained that Papa had specifically registered a portion of the business equity, 17%, carved out and placed in the trust's name before the business was fully transferred, along with a separate fixed deposit in the trust's name that had been compounding since registration. He said Papa had left written instructions with the trust documentation. Not a formal legal document, but a handwritten note, which was still in the file. He read it to me over the phone. It said, "For Priya, for the work she has done and will do. I know she will not ask for it, so I am making sure it is there for her to find." I could not speak for a moment after he read that. When I could, I asked him what the next steps were. He said I would need a lawyer to formally activate the trust and facilitate the transfer of assets into my name. He said the process was straightforward, given that the documentation was complete and properly registered. He said he would make himself available for whatever the lawyer needed from him. I had a lawyer by the end of the week. Her name was Advocate Sunita Rao, and she had practiced civil and property law in Pune for 22 years and had, in her own words, when I described the situation, seen this particular pattern more times than she would have liked. A daughter pushed out of a family business, a father who had seen it coming, a quiet legal structure that had survived the storm intact. "The trust is clean," she said, after reviewing the documentation. "Properly registered, properly maintained, no irregularities. Your brother's claim to the business doesn't affect the trust's assets because they were never part of what was transferred. Your father was careful. I asked her how long the process would take. She said 3 to 4 months, assuming no challenges. She asked if I expected challenges. I said I expected my brother to challenge everything. She said, then let him. The documentation is complete. He won't succeed, but he's entitled to try." Sanjay found out through a legal notice that Advocate Rao sent to him in his capacity as current operator of the business, notifying him of the trust's existence and the assets it held. Specifically, the 17% equity stake, which remained legally the property of the trust and had not been part of any legitimate transfer. I was told, by a cousin who remained in contact with both sides of the family, that when Sanjay received the notice, he read it 3 times before saying anything. That his wife had to ask him twice what it said before he answered. That when he finally spoke, his voice was entirely flat, the specific flatness of someone whose internal narrative has just been revised without their permission. He called me that evening. I answered. He said, without any preamble, "Papa never told me about this." I said, "No, he didn't." A long silence. Then, "He should have discussed it with me." I said, "He discussed it with a registered CA and a formal legal document. That seems like a more reliable conversation to have had." Sanjay went quiet again. When he spoke next, his voice had something in it I had not heard there before. Not remorse exactly, but a kind of deflation. The sound of someone who had built a confident version of events inside their own head and was now standing in the gap between that version and the one a legal document was describing. He said, "I genuinely thought Papa had wanted you to be independent." That's what he told me. I said, "Papa also registered a trust with 17% of the business equity in my name and left a note saying he knew I wouldn't ask for what was mine, so he was making sure it was there for me to find. I think both of those things can be true at the same time." He had no answer to that. He challenged the trust. His lawyer argued that the equity carve-out had been improperly executed, that it had not been reflected in the business's formal transfer documentation, that it created an ambiguity that should be resolved in favor of the current operating structure. Advocate Rao addressed each argument with the trust registration documents, the original equity breakdown that Papa had formally recorded with the CA at the time the trust was created, and the handwritten note that, while not legally binding in itself, provided clear and unambiguous evidence of intent. The process took 5 months rather than 4. At the end of 5 months, the trust was formally activated and its assets transferred. 62 lakh rupees, a 17% stake in a business I had helped build. Mine. I did not return to the business. I had no interest in operational involvement in something that had been, for 7 years, run entirely without me. What I had the stake converted to, through a negotiated buyout that Advocate Rao handled with characteristic efficiency, was a clean financial settlement. Sanjay paid it over 18 months, which was the timeline his business could support. I used part of it to start something of my own, a small financial consulting practice in Pune, working with the kind of mid-sized family businesses I understood from the inside. The irony was not lost on me. The rest I invested, carefully and without drama. What I think about, more than the money or the business outcome, is the note Papa had left in the trust file. I know she will not ask for it, so I am making sure it is there for her to find. He had seen me clearly. He had seen, with the particular accuracy of someone who has watched a person grow from infancy, exactly the kind of person I was. The kind who works without demanding recognition, who assumes that fairness will eventually be visible without being demanded, who will accept an injustice quietly rather than exhaust herself fighting people she loves. And he had decided, instead of trying to change me or warning me or making me into a different kind of person, to simply account for me as I actually was. To build something that would still be there for me even if I never asked for it. To place a quiet, legal, irrevocable structure around the fact of his love for me and leave it to time and a retired CA to deliver it. The 50,000 rupees my brother had handed me at our father's funeral. I had deposited it into a savings account on the day I received it, and I had never touched it. Not out of principle, not as a statement. Just because I had not needed it, and because somewhere in the back of my mind, I had not wanted it to become part of the new life I was building. After the trust settlement, I closed that account. I gave the 50,000 with 7 years of interest to a women's skills training organization in Agra that a friend had told me about. I don't know why that felt like the right thing to do with it. It simply did. Sanjay and I are not close. We are not estranged exactly. We speak at family occasions. We are civil. We navigate the shared territory of a mother who loves us both and does not want to choose. The conversation where he told me Papa had never mentioned the trust, where I heard the specific deflation in his voice, has never been revisited. I don't know whether he has made his peace with what happened or whether he has constructed a version of events that is more comfortable to live inside. It is not my concern. What I know and what I have carried since the day I read the letter from a retired CA on a Thursday evening in Pune is this. My father saw me. In the years when I was working quietly and being overlooked and accepting a situation that was unjust because I loved the people involved too much to fight them directly, in all those years, he saw exactly what was happening and exactly who I was, and he did something about it in the only way that would still work after he was gone. He registered a trust. He left a note. He trusted a careful man to hold it until the time came. Papa's love didn't make speeches. It made documents, and documents last. If Priya's story reached you today, you already understand something important. The people who love us most are not always the loudest ones in the room. Sometimes they are the ones sitting quietly, watching carefully, and building something solid that will still be standing long after they are gone. Papa didn't fight Sanjay. He didn't make accusations or declarations or demands. He made a document. A registered, legal, irrevocable document. And he trusted that eventually it would find the person it was meant for. That's the kind of love that doesn't need an audience. Subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who has ever worked quietly and been overlooked. And until next time, the people who see you clearly are the ones worth holding on to, even after they are gone. The day my father was buried, my brother called me into the sitting room where the